Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Comics Della Morte, aka Comics of Death, episode 83, Accidental Renegades, with the creator, Jeff. How you doing, man? Thank you for
Hey,
coming
thanks for
on.
having me. This is
Not a
awesome.
problem. Before we talk about your comic, just introduce yourself, what made you want to start doing comics and art, and just pretty much go down that path.
Sure. Well, first of all, appreciate you having me on the show. Big fan. Happy to be here.
Appreciate it.
I've been a fan of comics pretty much my whole life. Like a lot of people, I kind of grew up in the time where comics as a passion wasn't something you could advertise.
Mhm.
It wasn't always the coolest thing. You kind of had to sometimes keep it kind of quiet. And I can remember going to convenience stores and gas stations at night to buy my comics off spinner racks back when spinner
Yes.
racks were still a thing in stores.
Yeah. Quick trip
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah. For me, it was 7-Eleven, but yeah, same. Um, and just something I was always passionate about, something I always wanted to do. Always had my characters and my fan art and everything like that I would just kind of work on. For the longest time, I always made excuses for I was never ready to create my own comics. Either I wasn't good enough, or there wasn't enough time, or I didn't have the right equipment. And there was always a reason, not an excuse, that I couldn't do it. 2020 comes and the pandemic hits, and we're all on lockdown. And rather than spending all my time arguing with people on the internet, I decided to invest that energy into creating a comic book. And every time I wanted to get into a disagreement with someone, I spent some time creating, so that at the end of
Awesome.
it, at least I would have something to show for it. And I was able to get a one-shot comic book done and in the stores here locally for Free Comic Book Day in 2021. Um, that kind of inspired me that I can continue doing this. And from there, I started working on my new ongoing series, which is kickstarting now, called Accidental Renegades. And it's basically just a way for me to put my passions and some in some cases the things that bother or frustrate me into a form of art that I can use to kind of express myself.
Mhm. Awesome. So I know that you're a teacher, and how long have you been teaching for?
I've been teaching for about 6 years. Actually, my path is a little bit unique to a lot of creators because I actually spent 20 years in the military before I was a teacher. So,
Awesome.
like, my path has been very service oriented in a lot of ways. Creating has always been a passion of mine. I do often wonder what would happen if I went that route instead of the route I went, and where would I be now? But I think a
Mhm.
lot of people kind of wonder that sort of thing if they went left instead of right. I spent 20 years in the military, retired in 2016. From there, spent about a year working in corporate America, and then used my military experience to help get a teaching job in an elective program in local high school, and love it. Like, I love teaching. I love, the kids are great. They definitely keep you on your toes. It's a
Yeah.
great group of young men and women who challenge you. There's definitely some, especially at the high school level. There are some challenges,
Yeah.
but
And what
you're
do you teach?
watching. I teach in the high school, so I teach what's called the JROTC elective. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Okay, so
Probably
not
not.
every
It's been
school
a
has it.
long
So,
time since I've been in school.
yeah, some schools, depending on what school you go to, it may have had it. But in college, you have the ROTC, the Reserve Officer Training Corps.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
There's
yeah,
a
yeah.
high school
Gotcha.
equivalent, which is just an elective. It doesn't have any military service or anything associated with it, but it almost is kind of modeled after the old timey civics classes. You learn a lot
That's
about
cool.
citizenship and ways to be like a functioning adult. So we learn about financial management, citizenship, the Constitution, first aid, all those sorts of things. So it's a class that a lot of kids like because it's unlike any of their other classes. And if you don't like what we're learning today, we're going to learn something different next week, and you'll probably like that. So it's an interesting thing that's usually only open to retired military members. So I was able to kind of get a job teaching without having to go through the traditional teaching route. And
Cool.
they're great kids. And like I said, there's a lot that will challenge you and they'll push you. But at the end of the day, it is rewarding.
Yeah.
Difficult but rewarding, and I really do enjoy it. School's starting up in about 3 days. I'm not looking forward to that. I really enjoyed the summer. I'm definitely
Mhm.
not eager to run back into work, but I'm looking forward to getting back into seeing some of the kids.
Well, before we get into artwork, I mean, I don't know if you ever have, but I mean, it's better. It's probably, uh, great if a kid ever walk up to you. It's like, hey, because of you, I want to go into the military. I don't know if you ever had that.
I've had a couple of them, yeah, and a lot of them. We do kind of represent, I think, a certain goal for a lot of students,
Yeah.
and that's definitely something that I think we all take very, very seriously.
Mhm.
But I will tell you that there are all sorts of teachers in that building who inspire students in their own ways. I'm definitely not the only one. I'm
Gotcha.
just kind
Yeah.
of I'm kind of happy to be kind of considered with some of them sometimes.
Awesome. So pretty much with this accidental renegades, like, talk us talk to us a little bit about that. What gave you inspiration and the whole idea of creating these characters?
Well, I think one of the themes that kind of seems to run prevalent through all my work is that there's a certain responsibility for people who have power to use that power to the
Mhm.
to the best of their ability. My previous work kind of centered on that as well, and with Accidental Renegades, I wanted to kind of take the idea and kind of flip the idea of superheroes, that trope, a little bit on its side. So, Accidental Renegades is a 36-page, it's manga inspired comic about bumbling superpowered mercenaries who accidentally ignite a global revolution. So, with your traditional superhero story, those heroes aspire to be heroes, and that's been their goal from the start. They work to be heroes, they train to be heroes, they want the burden of heroism. In this book, it's a little bit different because these individuals don't want to be heroes. They kind of have heroism thrust on them through a sequence of events. And I think for a lot of people, that's relatable. We've all
Yeah.
probably been in a situation at some point where, through circumstances outside of our control, we've suddenly been shouldered with a ton more responsibility than we thought.
Mhm.
And it could be at work, it could be family, it could be from a loss or from a gain or something like that. And so I think this story will resonate with a lot of people because we've all kind of been in a situation where we found ourselves kind of over our heads, and it
Yeah.
wasn't because of anything we did, it was just because of the way things kind of played out. So it's an interesting way of looking at superheroes, because it's a team book. Not all of them will necessarily respond the same way, and I think people can
Mhm.
kind of relate to that too. There's a diversity of responses and perspectives that I think any reader can find someone who represents them in it.
Yeah. I was gonna say I really love this panel shot, just with the perspective there, and just oh man, it's just really great.
Thank you. Yeah, when I call it manga inspired, a lot of people kind of ask, like, "What do you mean manga inspired?" And
Yeah.
I've been a comic reader for a very long time, and as I read it more and more, I tend to find myself, and I think the same is true with movies and with music as well. I tend
Mhm.
to start leaning more towards stuff that's a little bit more off the beaten path, not necessarily all the mainstream stuff. And that is kind of where manga, I think my love of manga kind of falls in, is because it looks unlike a lot of other things. It has an energy to it. It plays with things like perspective. It plays with character design. It plays with anatomy. It never breaks those rules, but a lot of times it will bend them. And
Yeah.
so, as I was even working on some of these things, I was like, well, how can I make this just a little bit more, not wonky, but make it a little bit more odd, but still maintain, that's like, with the perspective, how can I twist this perspective just a little bit more so that it still makes sense and it doesn't take the reader out of the story, but it looks different. And
Mhm.
again, music, movies, comics, I'm getting older, and as I get older, I tend to really appreciate people who are trying new things. So I kind of try to do
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, as I see, you got only 9 days left of the Kickstarter,
Yeah.
and you definitely reached past your goal. Do you have any extra goals that you have in mind that you want to tell the audience? If
Yeah, so right now we've actually just crossed over stretch goal number two, and the way I designed it, and it's worth noting that this is my first Kickstarter, so I
awesome,
wanted to make it
congrats.
manageable. I wanted to definitely, thank you. Yeah, it was a huge relief, right? But I wanted to make it manageable. I didn't want to shoot for the moon and end up, under promising. Well, I didn't want to under promise and over deliver. I didn't want to
Mhm.
promise everything that I couldn't deliver on the first book. So the first stretch goal was improved printing, foil cover, because again, I'm a comic reader from the 80s and 90s. I love a good foil cover. So a
Yeah.
foil cover, improved quality printing. That was the first stretch goal, which we crossed. The second was stickers. So now we'll have individual stickers that go out with the physical backers. The
Mhm.
next stretch goal that we hit will be at about 3,500, and that will be trading cards. So I've always been a fan of
Oh,
trading
nice.
cards. Never really a passionate collector, and I kind of look back and wish I'd collected a little bit more of those. But I've always liked them, and with this, it's a first issue. A lot of characters appear in this book with a lot of cool backstories and cool power. So having cards for them, I think, is a pretty fun way to reward the people who back the book. And I think, with 9 days left, you've got that end of campaign push. I don't
Mhm.
I don't think it's impossible to think we'll hit it. And if we do, that's great. It just, means we'll get more for their bucks.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, with some trading cards, I still have some Garbage Pail Kid cards, and then wearing a Ninja Turtle shirt. I remember
Yeah.
with the Ninja Turtles when they came out with their trading cards, you would have like some cards with the trading card picture in the front, and then they had in the back a like half a picture, and you were trying to collect all those pictures to
Yep.
have one
Yep.
giant one. So yeah.
Yeah, I was actually talking to someone about that. I can't remember if it was like Fleer or Toss, but I had like the X-Men one. It was probably, I think,
Oh yeah.
either
Mhm.
3x3 or 3x4, that if you got them all, the other side basically created like, or if you got them all, they connected to form like a big picture. And it was like, I was like, man, that's really cool. That's pretty cool.
So I see that with the description, you have some like you have a giant mech and then a vampire that I see as on the team. It's
Yes.
that
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, this team, because it's a team book, went through a lot of iterations to get the right combination. I wanted to make sure I
Oh,
had
of
characters
course.
who challenged each other, as part of the plot, challenge each other's way of thinking, created some tension internally, and that they weren't redundant and were also unique enough and interesting to the reader. I had a character earlier on that I really liked, but it was
Mhm.
like, the ninja, and like every team book has like the silent ninja. I'm like, that's just too boring. I want to make something that's a little bit different. So I have a character that, is a Hindu ninja vampire. I'm like, that is unlike a lot of other things. And actually the backstory on that character, I think when we get to it, is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Very awesome. And with that, like, was it hard for you? Because I know you were saying like this is your probably your biggest comic book, right?
Mhm.
With most team books, especially with this one, was it hard for you to like really hone down to give like the characters time for them to shine and to really develop their personalities in the standalone book? Because as we've seen how DC had the Justice League and then they made their individual comics afterwards. Was it easy for you with this one, or do you feel that okay, I'm gonna probably make individual books where each member gets to shine?
Well, that's a great question, because the idea is that this will be an ongoing, so each character will actually kind of almost have part, like each arc will be dedicated in some part to a character, and that's not to say
Gotcha.
that the rest of them won't get time. It's just that it focuses a little bit on the backstory of each character per arc, so it's kind of mapped out to be about a 5 arc story.
Oh, okay,
However,
gotcha.
in the first issue, like the challenge that I have with this first issue that I think every first issue has is you have to set kind of the foundation of the world in a
Oh
way so
yeah.
that people understand at least you don't want to give it all away, right? But they have to understand a little bit. Okay, these are the basic rules of this universe. You can do
Hmm.
this, you can't do that. Now I understand. Let's go on with the story. That's part of it. Giving in the characters enough time so that they're interesting without it being all about them was a little bit of a challenge. And I I write it, I draw it, I do the inks and the screen tones, and I do the lettering. So I do everything pretty much except print it, which is kind of a blessing and a curse, because you're doing it all yourself. You kind of have the ability to kind of go back, and like you can kind of
Yeah.
halfway through and kind of change course a little bit, but it's okay because you're not screwing over your collaborators when you do that. So you can
Mhm.
kind of go loosely through the project and tighten it down on each iteration. And that's kind of how I do it. I start big picture, and then with each subsequent pull, I go tighter and tighter and tighter. But that also means, and it's even happening now, where it's like, you know what, I'm going to change that to next issue, but I'm going to focus on this issue instead, because it just
Yeah.
flows the story better. And I kind of have, my motto is, everything is in service to the story. So as long as the story is being told properly, it's okay to just leave a little bit out there for the reader to want to come back. In fact, I think that's recommended. You don't want
Mhm.
to be like, hey, this is Ronnie and this is what he does and here's everything about him and here's why he's important. But to be like, well, here's Ronnie and here's a couple things. And you're like, well, shit, I want to learn more about Ronnie. Like, I want to come back and
Yeah.
catch the next issue,
Mhm.
because what did he mean with that? And it's funny because the one shot I did for Free Comic Book Day had some of that in there. It had a couple characters mentioned. The main character never got his powers revealed. He was about to talk about his powers and he was interrupted. And people came to me, they're like, "So, like, what's his power?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's Marcus? And what's this guy's power? Like, who is that? You made a point
Mhm.
specifically of mentioning him, and who is he?" And I'm like, "Well, I can't give it all away in a one shot. You have to kind of come back to it. So
Yeah.
it's difficult, with the first issue to hit that balance. I think I got it, but I'm sure with each book I'm going to tighten down on a little bit. But I
Mhm.
mean, you know how it is. It's always that balancing act between giving away too much, not giving away enough, and just finding that sweet spot that you're giving the reader just enough so that they're really interested, but not so that you've already told them the ending.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And for like, since you're doing everything and, I do everything myself, like, what
Yeah.
do you feel are drawn to more? Like, do you feel that you like doing the artwork more or the actual like storytelling with the writing?
I'm going to be honest. I think I'm probably, if I sat down, I gave myself kind of a real hard look one day, like, what is the answer to that question? Because I have wondered myself. I think I'm probably better and faster at the storytelling aspect, like crafting the
Mhm.
story, the world building, and it might just
Yeah.
be because I kind of I percolate on it a lot in like my free time.
Yeah.
Writing is probably something I would argue I'm better at and definitely faster at. But I would argue that I enjoy the art more. Like I enjoy drawing more. To me,
So
it's more.
Gary.
What's up, Gary? For me, it's more fun. I
Mhm.
think I enjoy the art side of it because at the end it's therapeutic. It's at the end there's something to show for it.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and I do like and again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Like as you draw, you're problem solving the whole time. Like
Yeah.
okay, well if his arm is here, it's going to block this, so I got to put his arm down. I can't put this person here because the person then when I the next panel they're on the wrong side. Like you're problem solving the whole time, so it's much more cerebral. I feel
Yeah.
like
And if they're
writing
shorter
tends to
than this
be
person, then you have to
yeah,
draw
exactly,
exactly
like
what
all that stuff.
angles.
And,
Yeah.
and then I mean, how many times have you done this where like you literally draw and you stand up and you take a physical step back to be like, okay, I see now. I see now what I did.
Yeah.
His arm is too long, right? Okay, I got it now. And you said like
Or
I
it's like, "Oh,
enjoy that.
crap. He has a scar on the other side of the face."
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the problem with the method I work on. I know some people will go a page at a time and they'll kind of jump pages. I actually
Mhm.
go a panel at a time.
Oh,
There's this
yeah.
guy I listen
That's
to
pretty much I
who
do
has
too.
yeah, like his idea, and I've adopted it on this, and it's really working for me. Is he sits down, he just looks, he goes, okay, I want to do this panel on page 12. Okay. So he does that.
Mhm.
He works on that and he gets it done. It's really good because he's motivated to do it. The next day, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to do this panel on page 2. And he does that. So he goes in whatever order inspires him. So he puts his most energy into the most important panels. So if at the end he kind of ends up in a time crunch, all he has left are like, a silhouette panel or maybe like a panel without much detail, and it doesn't screw over the story because you're investing all your time into the ones you that are most important.
Yeah. Mhm.
If you look at most books, usually the last page is usually pretty important. The last page is where your cliffhanger usually happens. Something like that is relatively important on the last page.
Mhm.
If you go first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, all the way out, your last page is going to be probably your biggest time crunch, and your
Yeah.
last page should not be the one you're crunched on. So I do like the method of doing that. But like you said, the challenge is you got to remember, if you do page 12, you got to remember that guy got punched in the face on page 4, so he needs to have like a split lip. Otherwise, you
Mhm.
got to go back and make some changes, which I've had to do
Exactly.
for the same reason. Like I'm like, oh crap, this guy like he got messed up. He can't not have like his sleeve is torn. It needs to be torn for the rest of the pages. So I've had to go
Yeah.
back and kind of correct that, but you kind of sacrifice that for the energy of that you're able to put into those pages.
Mhm. For sure. And pretty much it's one of those things like, that your skills as an artist at page 1, but till page 36, your artwork has improved so much because you've
Yeah,
been spending so much time on it.
yeah, absolutely, yeah,
And like you said, with the comic, you started doing it during COVID and everything. Like if people, like, not to say that people can't watch their favorite shows, but if you're wasting 30 minutes to watch a TV show, you have time to draw a comic.
yeah, absolutely,
So
yeah.
yeah.
And it's funny you say that because the one thing that I kind of said when I was 2020 and I'm sitting down and I'm making my comic is it was like a joke with my family. Like my son was like, "You're making that comic, Dad?" Like I was joking around for years, like when I make my comic, and it became almost like a running joke. And I kind of said,
Yeah.
what that like one way or another, by the end of this year, I'm going to be a year older. I'm either going to be a year older having made an excuse again for why I couldn't create a comic book,
Mhm.
or I'm going to be a year older having created a comic book. Like the time of the passage of time is going to happen no matter what.
Yeah.
It's a matter of whether or not I have anything to show for it. And I think kind of lit the fire that I needed. And my first comic book, like there's a couple pages on there that I'd love to have back and redo. But
Mhm.
the amount that I learned and the way that I've grown from just being able to do that and hit that deadline is pretty invaluable. I mean, you know how it is. Like, if you can't create on time, it doesn't matter how good you create. You have to be able to create something and get it out on a schedule. Otherwise, you're not really doing anything for anyone.
Yeah.
And to do that,
Exactly.
to finally be able to do that was like, all right, I can do this now. No more excuses. I know I can do it. I've already done it. Now I'm going to keep doing it.
Mhm. That's awesome. So, do you want to talk anything more about your comic
I mean, just
before we get into
for
some
any
random questions?
no, I mean, for anyone listening, I think it's a cool story. If you like, like irreverent
It
comic
is
books, I say
PG-13
it's
that I see, right?
yeah, PG-13 because it does have, a little bit of violence, not anything inappropriate, but it does, toe the line, right? So I kind of say if you like books like Saga, Next Wave, Umbrella Academy, like those type of
Oh, Umbrella
irreverent
Academy is
stories,
great.
yeah, that are like a little bit off the beaten path, but still super energetic. That's kind of what I was going for. If you're a fan of manga, particularly shonen manga, there's a lot in there.
Sweet.
It and I kind of say if you love you want a comic book with heart, there are lots of comic books out there. If you want a comic book with humor, there are lots out there. If you want a comic book
Mhm.
that involves fights and punching, there are a lot out there. But Accidental Renegades is a book that has all three. So if that's you up, sounds like it's something up your alley, I encourage anyone to check it out. Back it, and I think you'll be super happy with the product.
Sweet. Go, guys. I mean, he only got 9 days left.
Yeah,
And I like how what Gary says here, that is a necessary realization that in a year you could be either caught up on a TV show or have finished work. True
yeah,
that.
I know there are all these celebrities that are like, just do it, just create. And I'm like, all right, I know that's easier said than done, but as much of a cliche as it is, I will tell people when they say, well, how can I create a comic? I'm like, just create a comic. Just
Yeah.
sit down and create a comic. It doesn't matter if it's your best work. Your best work is gonna be the next one, right? Your best work is always
Mhm.
one step ahead of you.
Yeah.
Sit down, do it, produce something, put the effort in, and I think you'll be surprised at how much progress. Just like Gary says, whether you make progress on a show or make progress on your craft, that time could be spent making progress.
Hmm. True that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so guys, the link in for the Kickstarter is in the description, and then afterwards I'm gonna put his Instagram and all that stuff in there. But yeah, so with the questions now is like, you're a fan of the show and everything. So,
Yep.
you watch horror and you
Hmm.
probably a horror fan. What
Yep.
would be your favorite horror movie of all time
Okay. Favorite horror movie. I got to go
and
a little old.
why?
I got to go old school, and maybe it's because a lot of my favorite comics are ones that hit me at that right moment in time where like I was just getting into comics.
Mhm.
I would argue that probably my favorite all time favorite horror movie because of what it represents to me is Nightmare on Elm Street. And now I know a
Oh,
lot of people are like, oh,
yes.
Nightmare on Elm Street. I number one, I feel like it holds up.
Yeah, the original OG,
It
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I feel like it holds up. I love the backstory on the making of it that I
Mhm.
recently saw a documentary. I thought it was fascinating how they did that.
Yeah.
I feel like, the special effects still hold up, which not a lot of horror stories can say that
Yeah,
it
her running
does.
up the stairs and her feet sinking in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Mhm.
and the Johnny Depp getting sucked into the bed and the blood, like these
Mhm.
stories kind of hold up. Um, so I love the whole Nightmare on Elm Street series. I'd argue that the first one is probably, from a craft perspective, the most well made.
Yeah.
But I know, and I know it's kind of cheesy, but I'm partial to Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors.
I
Um,
love 3. 3 is the first
it,
one I've ever seen,
I mean,
and
and I'm gonna say
I'm a
it's
big Freddy
cheesy.
Krueger fan.
Yeah, it's cheesy,
It's
but
cheesy, but the great
it's fun.
idea, yeah, the
Yeah,
great idea is that you literally not just fighting Freddy, who is like a dream killer, but you have a dream power,
yeah,
like you have a superpower in that dream.
yeah.
And I
And I
always,
mean, the soundtrack, the Dawkins soundtrack's
oh
awesome, and
my
I do
gosh,
love.
I love that song. I listen to that
Oh,
song as much as I can.
so good. But I kind of, and I think the Dream Warriors is kind of like the intersection of horror and comics that a lot of horror movies don't, because and again it's kind of like ripped from the pages of a superhero comic. You go into
Yeah,
the dream world and you control your power, and now you have the ability to fight back. And
yeah.
I mean, I think
And the
you
kills
know,
are so, creative, especially
yeah,
when you get into, like, Dream Master 4, as I say on the show, where Freddy literally turns a girl into a cockroach and kills her.
yes. I was talking to my wife about that tonight. I'm like, and then at the end he's like, roaches chicken. I'm like, it's so cheesy, but it's so awesome. She gets
Yeah,
stuck
but
to
the
the
way
glue
her
trap.
face was peeling apart and it showed her
Yeah,
cockroach form, amazing
yeah.
work.
I was
Great
like, it was.
special effects.
Oh my god, I'm like his one-liners are so cheesy, but
Mm,
such a fun movie. I love Wes Craven in general. I like
yeah,
the Elm Street ones. I kind of got back into horror with Scream.
yeah.
I feel like
I
he
always
kind of
say
understood that.
I was gonna say, I always say Dream Warrior was my first horror movie that I've ever seen, my movie that made me fall in love with Freddy Krueger, and my first movie where I saw a naked woman for the first time.
Yeah, I love
Uh,
what Wes Craven does.
but
I think
did you know about the documentary though, that
yeah,
originally they were gonna have Freddy's head on her body, I'm like, "Oh, man, they would have destroyed a lot of boys that were coming into age."
Yeah. Yeah, I remember seeing, like, how they did the glove in the tub and all that other
Yeah,
stuff, and, like, yeah, the documentary on that was really, really fascinating. I just like I said, I think that was a time in my life where, like you said, like, I mean, I was a teenager, like, and a young
yeah,
teenager. I wasn't like a 20, no, 19-year-old. I was like middle school, yeah,
yep,
middle school age at the time. So I mean, like, you're going over friends' houses, it's all the guys and all the girls, and you're like, the freedom of being out on your own, and you're
mhm,
watching movies that you're probably quote unquote not supposed to be allowed to watch. And
yep,
it's just like, that takes me back. Like, I can still remember, like, who I was, hanging out with, all the,
mhm,
the friends with our acid wash jeans and big hair, like, watching Nightmare on Elm Street, man. Just like, it's a great movie. It still holds up, and it's like, it's scary. I mean, I don't know of anyone who could fall asleep easily after watching Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time.
mhm.
So it's scary, but it's also, it's fun. You can go back to it over and over again. So to answer the question, favorite, I would probably say it's got to be the Nightmare on Elm Streets. Most recent horror movie that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed Midsummer, believe it or not.
Oh, man, we could
I
talk
liked
about
Midsummer.
Midsummer.
I like Midsummer.
Yeah,
Again, now as I get older, like, Midsummer, like, stayed with me for a while. Like, if I'm being
because it's
straight up, like,
psychological,
yeah, it stayed with me. Like,
and
at the end,
it's one of those things that it could be real.
yeah, like, I remember it ended, and I stood there, like, I got up and I kind of stood there. I'm like, man, that's fucked up. Like,
Yeah,
that's messing me up a little bit. Like, I'm thinking about this now. I can
mhm.
remember, like, Midsummer getting in my head for a while. I didn't know what to expect going in. I think Florence
Even
Pugh's
Gary agrees.
underrated as yeah, Gary, no, Gary, I'm right there with you. I think Florence Pugh's underrated as an actress. I think she did a great job in that movie, but
Oh,
that movie
yeah.
kind of messed me up. Like, it messed me up for a while. Like, I haven't been messed up for a movie like that since Seven. Seven was the last movie that I walked out of that
What's in the
movie theater being
box?
like, man, that messed me up. Like,
Yeah,
I know Seven's considered like a psychological noir and not horror, but
mhm,
I saw Seven in the theaters, and then I went out to dinner right after, and I couldn't eat, and that doesn't happen to me. Like,
yeah,
I'm not the guy, like, I don't get squeamish, like, I don't ever I don't lose my appetite easy. I remember going to a restaurant and just being like, man, I have no appetite right now. That Seven stayed with me, Old Boy stayed with me, and Midsummer were three movies that after they were over, I was like, man, this is gonna mess me up for a little bit.
mhm.
Yeah, good movies though, all good movies.
Awesome. So now going into it, I could probably guess what you're gonna say, but who is your favorite 80s horror slasher of all time and why?
Yeah, I got to go with Freddy. I got to go with Freddy.
Mm,
And that's not to take anything away from, like, Jason or Michael Myers or anyone like that, or, Leatherface. Although I guess you could argue Leatherface might be more 70s, but
yeah,
I don't know. I got to go with Freddy because, number one, his look is iconic.
yeah,
Okay. To be fair, Jason and Michael Myers are pretty iconic too, so I can't say his look is iconic. But Freddy was the first, at least the first slasher that at least I saw who verbally interacted with his
yeah.
prey.
Like
Michael Myers didn't
there
say
was a
anything.
lot of people who played Michael and Jason, but
Yeah,
there's only one person that could play
yeah,
his prey.
exactly. And no one else could do that like Robert Englund can do it. So, I mean, no disrespect to anyone the other was, but anyone could put on the Jason mask, anyone could put on the Michael Myers mask, anyone
Mhm.
could do the Leatherface mask, but only Robert Englund can be Freddy. I mean, he that's his role forever.
Yeah,
And I did like that it was goofy, like, it was scary and it definitely had horror moments, but
mhm.
it was more of almost like a mainstream horror movie, whereas I think the Halloweens and the Friday the 13th and the Texas Chainsaws were pure horror slasher movies.
Yeah,
Friday or Nightmare on Elm Street, I think, kind of put a little bit more personality into the slasher, and I thought that was really, really interesting.
yeah, because you
At
had the
least,
comedy
yeah,
going on. So,
yeah,
you had you had Nightmare on Elm Street that had the comedy. You had Chucky, and then my favorite comedy horror movie of all time, I always say, Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
yes, yes,
A-
Killer
And
Clowns, yeah,
and
Killer. You
and
gotta respect Killer Clowns, yeah.
and I don't know if you know, but next year they're coming out with a video game
I
for all
saw that.
consoles.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw that. I saw that. I got to check that out. Yeah. I mean, I guess you got to respect the OGs, right? Like, you
Oh
wouldn't
yeah.
have Freddy if you didn't have Leatherface and you didn't have
Uh-huh.
Jason, you didn't have Michael Myers. So I mean, you got to give it up for those guys. They're on the
But
they're on
Freddy
Mount
became
Rushmore.
like a pop icon.
Yeah, but I think Freddy's got to be on Mount Rushmore too. If you had a Mount Rushmore, I would
Mhm.
argue what, four people: Leatherface, Jason, Michael Myers, and Freddy, right? Like,
Yeah.
who else would be on it?
Mhm.
I don't know. Like, I don't know who else you'd
I
put
mean,
on it.
some people could say
Maybe
Chucky,
Pinhead. Yeah, Chucky
but
or Pinhead, maybe.
well,
Yeah,
Pinhead, yeah, it
yeah,
depends,
that's
but
true.
Definitely Jason, Michael, and Freddy would
Yeah.
be the main 3. I don't know who
Yeah,
the
that's
4th
true. That's a
one
good
would
point.
be.
Yeah, I forgot about Chucky. Chucky might be on it. Pinhead might be on it. There's a couple iconic looks that would be
Mhm.
on it. Yeah, I forgot about Child's Play. Chucky was pretty good too.
Yeah, the TV show was actually really good.
Yeah, yeah. I can remember. This might be dating myself here, but I remember watching Tales from the Crypt, um,
Oh, love that
like
show.
on HBO. Like some of those were like
Very graphic.
scary. Yeah, some of them were just kind of goofy, but like some of them were like scary. I can remember the one
My favorite
where
episode, the
this
Santa Claus.
that's the one, the Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And did you know, like when I don't know, you probably know this, but there's a scene where the camera's looking down from the
Mhm.
closet. I don't know if you know where I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And she's trying to figure out what to do, and you can see that there's a shotgun on the shelf.
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, the character never knows it's there, or never realizes or forgets or whatever. And she's looking for something else, and she
Yeah.
leaves the shotgun. And the whole time, like I'm watching this, I'm like, dude, you could get out of this. There's a shotgun, and the fact that she like for whatever reason closes the door and leaves. Oh
Yeah.
man, that got me because I was like,
Mhm.
she had it, like she had a way out. She could
Yeah.
have gotten out. And then at the end, he kind of goes up to her, and I'm like, oh man, like that one was spooky as
But
hell.
that was so great because, like, before Marvel and all this stuff, the one of the, original one a comic that actually became a TV show was Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah,
Sure, the
that's
Crypt
true.
Keeper design was a lot different than what you've seen in the comic,
Yeah,
but it became such a great icon, and, depending on the age, like, I could talk to people around my age in their 30s, 40s who are like, "Yeah, I never knew Tales from the Crypt was from a comic book series." I'm like, "Yeah, it is. You should read these comics," and I
yeah,
my sister, she's gonna be, her birthday's in a couple weeks, and found some Tales of the Crypt comics at a yard sale. I'm like, those are, probably very, very pricey right there, depending on if those are original ones.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
depending on when they came out, if they came out like way back before the comics code, they're
Mhm.
probably worth a ton of money.
Well, the Comics Code, you know, was created not because of superhero comics, it was created because
No,
of horror comics,
yeah, because of horror
you
comics
know?
largely, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. So, with you got your favorite movie, what would be your most favorite horror video game if you got one? If you play them.
Horror video game, probably. Let's see. I think House of the Dead.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
one.
House of the Dead. I want to make sure I'm saying it right because House of the Dead. So many,
The
many,
one
many
with
years
where
ago.
you have the guns with you and your partner?
No, this one was a console game. Maybe it wasn't
Oh,
House of the
okay, yeah.
Dead.
Yeah. Okay.
I got to go back. House of the Dead, though. I do like House of the Dead. I got to remember which one this was, and it'll probably hopefully come to me by the end of the interview. Because I remember playing it, but also kind of sitting and watching it. And we were, young lieutenants. Me and a friend of mine, we were in
Mhm.
like our little apartment in El Paso, Texas. And he took his money. He bought this just rocking sound system, television. I don't even know. Maybe it was Resident Evil. I think it might have been Resident Evil. And he got like this, I don't know, PS2, whatever it was. I don't even remember. And he's like, yeah, come on over. We're going to play, let's say, Resident Evil. And I went into his apartment. He had his lights out. He had the speakers like
Mhm.
full blast. And it was just dark as a coffin. And every time like he turned the corner and something would jump scare, man, it was scary. And what was even scary, I think, was I was watching him play, so I couldn't control anything. Like
Yeah.
I was like, go, don't go left, don't go left, don't go left. And he looks left. I'm like, like Resident Evil, if under the right conditions, was a scary, scary game. I also remember playing Doom, and that wasn't
Yeah.
scary, but it was gory. Like it was one of the first really gory games before like
Mhm.
Mortal Kombat with like
Yeah.
its 8-bit graphics or something. But yeah, I remember playing Doom, watching the guy play Resident Evil. House of Dead is another good one.
Yeah. Really awesome stuff. So
Yeah,
would you
unfortunately, I don't have enough time to play video games anymore. Like I
I
haven't played, I
understand
haven't
that.
really invested my time in a video game in too long.
Yeah. It's been a while since I played a lot of video games, so I'm definitely gonna do the Killer Clown, so
Yeah, I got to check that out. That sounds really, really good.
yeah. Would there be now with a horror, is there a typical horror movie that you think that is really bad, but everybody else loves?
I never really loved. You're gonna hate me for this, but I never really loved Child's Play
Okay, gotcha.
because to me, I never really felt like the character. Like, okay, Chucky's scary and all, but Chucky's like 2 feet tall. Like,
Yeah.
you like just you kick him. Like, I never. There's so many slashers and horror centerpieces that are legitimately scary. Like if I saw Pinhead, I would be terrified, right?
Yeah.
If I saw Leatherface, I'd be terrified. If I saw,
You wanna
you know,
wanna say Candyman in the mirror.
yeah, right. I would say Candyman in the mirror. Like if I saw like even, I mean, maybe I wouldn't be afraid of Jigsaw because it's a little dude on a tricycle, but like there's a lot of horror movie people that in real life would be horrifying.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would find. I get that he's supernatural. I'll get all that, but like I wouldn't be necessarily terrified of Chucky. I never really understood all the love that people have for Child's Play, just
Mhm.
because for me, it never really resonated with me.
But the guy who does the voice does an amazing job.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and don't get me wrong, the movies were entertaining.
Mhm.
I wouldn't put them on like the pedestal of the greatest slasher movies. And maybe that I didn't see the new one though. I heard good things about the new one. I haven't seen the new Chucky Child's Play, but
I didn't
yeah.
like it as I really
Yeah, I
didn't
heard
like it.
mixed things. I heard
Yeah.
mixed things, but I think it kind of depends on if you grew up on the other ones, you're
Yeah.
probably much more selective about the new one.
Mhm.
But if the new one is your kind of introduction to the character, I think it's probably better.
Gotcha. Now, is there like with you and you doing your comics and everything, is is there a limit on how graphic you would go with your work?
There is right now, yes, and there is right now. In fact, I kind of had to pull this story back a little bit, and for two reasons. One is, I'm still at the point in my my creative career where like my family doesn't 100% understand, and I want to make sure I'm not throwing so much weirdness at like my mom and like my nephew and niece that they're like, whoa, that's Uncle Jeff's weird. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
take the brakes off. And also the other thing is, and it's realistically, I mean, I teach in a public high school, so
Yeah,
if
that probably is
if
a little bit
yeah, like
challenging
I
for
am
you.
concerned about going a little bit too much and having, a student pick it up and, get known as, oh, that's the guy who, had the, extremely graphic, ultra violent comic book. Cause I
Yeah.
do feel like there's a place for those stories. And I honestly, I feel like I have some of those stories I could tell.
Mhm.
I just, I don't feel that I need to tell it right now. I think I can
Yeah.
tell my stories the way I want and still push the boundary without going over the boundary.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Yeah, I would love to tell, I have a couple ideas for horror. I'm not really a slasher gore horror. I'm more of a psychological, you know, things that like existentially scare you type
Hey,
of
no, nothing
thing.
wrong with that.
Yeah, that, and that's kind of my. So I don't have to necessarily worry about the gore, but I do find I get older and they're like really they're Leatherface is not what scares me. Like there are real
Mhm.
monsters in the world and
Yeah.
existential dread. Like I find that that's kind of interesting too.
Awesome. So what would be like the number one horror movie that scared you growing up?
So all right, I'm going to admit this. It wasn't because it was I'll tell you a story. I saw the movie, the same thing, a whole group of friends, we'd all hang out, we'd watch horror movies. And I saw the movie Shocker. Now,
Oh, yeah.
not a particularly good movie. Like, if I'm being
Uh-huh.
honest, it had an okay idea, but it
Yeah.
wasn't a great horror movie. As far as like
Mhm.
the horror movies that were coming out then, it was lower tier. I think we can all
Yeah.
agree. But that night, I get on my bike and I'm riding home and I have my headphones in. I'm listening to Van Halen's 1984. And the first song on 1984 is 1984. And it's just this kind of spooky keyboard sound. And I remember riding my bike home and it was dark and a little bit foggy. And I think it was starting to drizzle a little bit with the beginning of that album playing in my headphones. And man, when I tell you, I've never ridden a bike so fast to get home. And it wasn't that the movie was scary, but again, like it stuck in my head a little bit. And
Yeah.
just riding my bike home as a kid after watching Shocker, which again was dumb entertainment, but
Mhm.
watching Shocker, that moment, maybe not the movie, but that moment really scared me. I think, yeah, I think that's like one of the scarier moments because I do tend to be able to kind of separate the movie from like reality and just enjoy the movie for what it is.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I thought that moment, man, like that creeped me out. Like, and I would say, like I said, Midsummer, the end of Midsummer, there were a couple scenes in there that were like kind of shocking, and there was a couple moments after that I did kind of sit there for a minute or two, like,
Mhm.
man, I don't know how to feel about this movie. This movie got me.
Yeah. It's one of those things, if a movie could scare you, mentally and emotionally, I think it's did its job, and,
Yeah,
you're just seeing more and more movies coming out horror movies coming out like that, which is
yeah,
good because, I mean, people could say what they want with the M. Night Shyamalan movie Old, but I really enjoy that, you know?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to see. Oh, I haven't seen Old yet, and I haven't seen Nope. I need to
Yeah.
get out and see those
Yeah.
two movies.
Yeah.
I've heard mixed things about Old, but I've heard mostly good things about Nope. And I
Yeah.
gotta get out now that I have some free
But
time.
yeah, there's Nope and Us and stuff like that. Yeah, it has gore in it, but it's again psychological. And
Yeah,
it's just good that we're coming out of that where we don't have all this torture porn horror that has been
yeah,
going on for such a
yeah.
long time with again, Hostel and the movie I always mention
S-
because I hate it, Human
Yeah,
Centipede.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I never finished it, to be honest with you. Like,
Yeah.
because that movie I think is popular just for shock. Like
Yeah. Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily have a story to it. I mean, there's lots of movies out there that are shocking in their
Yeah.
gore, but still tell. Like, there's a couple scenes in Midsummer that were pretty gory,
Yeah.
but told a really interesting story. Like Human Centipede,
Even
I've
the
seen
80s.
parts of it, but I never finished it because it just
Yeah.
didn't capture me.
Yeah. Even with Friday the 13th
Yeah,
and, Halloween, they had gore, but, it had a story. You had
yeah,
characters that you really loved and fell in love with.
yeah. And that's the thing I think a lot of people don't really appreciate about horror is that in order to tell a good horror story, really the ingredients are the same as telling any other good story. Like you have to care about the characters. If
Yeah.
you don't care at all about the characters, if you don't resonate with you in some way,
Mhm.
you know, like Scream was a horror movie, but was almost kind of like a comedy at the same time.
Yeah.
But you actually
Exactly.
were invested in the characters and you felt like actual real stakes when they were in danger. The
Yeah.
Human Centipede. I mean, you watched it because it was really more of like a rite of passage to say you watched it than
Yeah.
watching it because it was an enjoyable. No offense to anyone, but it wasn't even a particularly well made movie.
Mhm. Exactly. That's awesome. Well, let me see. Uh, is there when it comes to horror as well, beside is there, like, a favorite, like, company that really sticks out to you where you were growing up as like, "Wow, I really love what they did, and I wish they could do more." Me personally, I'm happy that I'm seeing even though it's kinda cheesy, but growing up as a kid, everything was full moon with me with the Puppet Master series,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
because it was just so good.
yeah. I mean, as far as like studios, again, I hate to be a broken record, but I got to stay with New Line Cinema.
Yeah.
They're again not, and this is not to shit on
Nightmare
any
on Elm
current
Street made
horror.
everything that was
Yeah,
like if you saw New Line Cinema, you knew that was gonna be like
yeah. Once that
certain
beginning
movies.
little like thing came up, like you knew you were in for something, and
Yeah.
I maybe again because I tend to romanticize probably certain moments in my life. Like I can still remember like I said the comic books that got me into comic books. I can still remember
Mhm.
the music that got me into a particular band or a particular genre of music. Like I still listen. Like my playlists are a lot of older music just on repeat, right?
Yeah.
Because that
Same here.
speaks to a time and place for me. For me, like the Nightmare on Elm Streets, Scream, the New Line Cinema films, the Wes Craven stuff also in particular.
Mhm.
Really kind of it's always going to hold a special place. If I watch a million horror movies, those are always going to be the ones that I remember. If you say, like you said, what are your most impactful? What are the ones that mean the most to you? It's those movies because of a time and place and my introduction to the genre, kind of
Yeah.
something that opened up my passion for it. Really enjoying it would not exist, I don't think, without that studio and those films. So I gotta give it to New Line.
Even with TriStar, if I'm thinking that
Yeah,
straight,
yeah,
with
TriStar.
the TriStar, with the Pegasus, the number one movie that
Yeah,
sticks out to me was, the Monster Squad, you know?
yeah. Was Halloween TriStar?
I can't remember.
I don't
I would
know
have to
either.
look back at that.
I don't claim to be an expert on movie studios. I'd have
But
to
it's
go back.
definitely one of those things a lot of
Yeah,
movie studios that aren't around were really big because of
yeah,
80s just being diehard horror movies,
yeah. Absolutely.
go to Blockbuster or whatever you
Oh yeah,
had, and just like, "Wow, I don't know what that movie is, but the front cover of the, artwork looks sweet, and I wanna get it."
yeah, yeah.
Like, most
I'm
people
telling you.
never heard of the movie Society, and that's a weird ass movie.
Now that one I'm not familiar with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can remember like again, like, oh, my older brother, my older sister went and rented this and they got to return it tomorrow. So we're gonna
Mhm.
watch it tonight. It's like, all right, let's do it. And
Yeah.
just like that's how you get introduced to back then, that's how you can get introduced to I mean, now you can still through the internet you get introduced to all sorts of stuff. But
Yeah.
back then, like for most of us, our older siblings were our introduction to
Yeah.
things.
Mhm.
I listened to at least growing up, the music I started listening to was based on the records and cassettes my brother had. And he's
Yeah.
like, hey, listen to this. And that kind of opened me up to like hard rock, heavy metal.
Mhm.
You want to talk about horror, like Twisted Sister. I remember listening to Twisted Sister. That was like Captain Howdy was like
Yeah.
a scary song back then. So like
Mhm.
even in the 80s, like horror permeated so many different things, not just the
Look at the
comics.
gate. It was a horror
Yeah,
song, it was a rock song played backwards to open up the
yeah,
gate of hell,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Like I mean, like Twisted Sister, the Wasp, all those bands that
Mhm.
were coming out, like King Diamond trying to like scare
Yeah.
people, Alice Cooper, all of them, like horror at that
Seen
point
him
was
in
so
concert,
much
that
in the
was great.
culture. Oh, I never saw Alice Cooper in concert, but yeah, like so much in the culture of it. And I think the horror movies had a lot to do with that.
Mhm. For sure. Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
awesome stuff.
I don't know if you wanna ask me anything, but we're at, like, the 46 mark, and I think I pretty much asked, like, all the key hard actually, when it comes to universal monsters, what would be your favorite universal monster and why? Like Wolfman, Dracula?
So I gotta go with the creature from the Black Lagoon. If we're
What's up,
counting
Mike?
him, are we counting him as Universal Monster?
The creature from the Black Lagoon? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one of the
Okay.
OGs. Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually funny because we're catching up. My wife and I are catching up on Stranger Things, right? And we're
Oh, I love that.
finally we're finally almost caught up. We're gonna get there. Just couldn't catch up. And we're at the part now where they're like all going underwater and everything like that.
Yeah.
And I turned to my wife and I said, "That is the if there was one job in the world I will never have, it's being like a rescue diver.
Yeah.
Going down in deep, dark, murky water and coming across bodies like that is literally every fear I have all put together."
Mhm.
And I remember watching the Creature from the Black Lagoon in 3D,
Oh,
and
man.
it started out with the camera going underwater, and
Yeah.
like everything was coming at you, and the water was black and white, the water was murky. I feel like if done right, the Creature from the
He
Black
doesn't get
Lagoon
as
is
much love
so
as the other ones.
no, and I feel like number one, the creature design is just super cool. Like,
Oh, yeah.
no
Hell yeah.
disrespect to Dracula, but Dracula is like a little bit of what like Paint create like a Widow's Peak and
Mhm.
whatever. Creature from the Black Lagoon though, like the I don't know if it was Weston or whoever who did the makeup for that, but it was like awesome, like such a cool design,
Yeah.
and the water aspect, the swamp aspect, it's like so visceral, like it just combines so many
It
things
was
you're
Jaws
afraid
before
of.
Jaws.
Yeah, right, and it was just like I mean, maybe it doesn't hold up as well today, but yeah, of those Universal monsters, I love Wolfman, I love Frankenstein, I love the Mummy, love Dracula. Like I respect them all, but like the creature from the Black Lagoon, I think that's kind of a dark horse, but that dude like
'Cause
is
how could you
is
really
cool and
protect
scary,
yourself in a body of water?
right? Yeah, like
And
if
this thing is probably faster swimming than you
yeah,
are, and
and
you
with
really
enough
can't
ability to like
hide, and
reason. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
and you really can't hide unless you have an oxygen tank because you
yeah,
can't hide underwater for too long or
right.
you'll die.
But one thing I will say that I love about all those Universal monsters is that they're basically at the end of the day they're just misunderstood. Like I kind of
Yeah.
like that aspect of it. Jason's not misunderstood. Freddy's not misunderstood. Like they're not really misunderstood. They're not good people who are just
Yeah,
in a
like
bad. Like
Frankenstein, I love
yeah,
Frankenstein's
like
monster, and I say
Frankenstein, like Wolfman.
that's more of a tragedy
Yeah,
because
absolutely. Like
this person is made up of different body parts, and they're
yeah,
realizing, is this my hand or somebody else's hand?
yeah, absolutely. And that's like
You know,
that's kind of an
do I
interesting
know how
take.
to
Like I
play the
said,
piano, or does someone else that know how to play the
right.
piano?
Yeah, and that's Universe Monsters. That's a really good question because I don't feel like they get the respect that they deserve. I
Yeah.
know they tried to make a monsters universe and it kind
Mhm.
of fell flat,
Yeah.
but I mean, hopefully they can revive that because that would be a really good idea. Most of those things are in the public domain anyway now, so
Oh, yeah. You could write your own, like,
yeah,
Dracula story and
yeah. I don't
whatnot.
know if the creature from the Black Lagoon is, but Frankenstein, Dracula, Mummy, those are all from what I recall public domain right now. So
Mhm. Yeah. Awesome.
that's a good question.
We're at the 50 mark. I appreciate you coming on. I mean, I don't know if you wanna ask me anything, but it was fun talking to you. Definitely have you on in the future if you have free time.
Awesome. I do have one question though.
Yeah,
I'll make sure I get it. I know your least favorite horror movie, right? You made that very clear. You're not a
yeah,
fan of the Human Centipede.
yeah.
What is your second most favorite horror movie? Not your most favorite, your second most. What comes in second for you?
Well, my favorite would have been, John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah, such a good movie. Such a good movie.
Second, oh man, that's hard. You know, it would definitely have to be, just because it means so much to me, it would have to be like Dream Warriors, just
Okay. All right.
because it's it's one of those movies that brought me into it,
Yeah.
and I mean, I could probably think of something else, different after we get off the show, but it's
Yeah.
just so many different horror movies, like, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. That's my favorite horror comedy of all time.
Hmm.
But there's just so many different tiers of what horror movie could fall in what. Because as I say, unlike a typical superhero comic, or movie, you know what you're gonna get, but horror has subgenres. You
Yeah,
have
absolutely.
this, you have this. Like, I could also say, instead of like Nightmare on Elm Street, I could say the original Alien. That's just a
Right.
great movie
Right.
too.
Yeah.
And that definitely, the other ones was like more like a superhero aspect, especially Aliens, the second one, but the first one was definitely all horror right there.
Yeah.
But
All
yeah.
right, good answer, man. Yeah, no, that's everyone knows their least favorite and their most favorite, but like if you ask
Yeah.
like your second most, everyone's like,
It's
that's a good one. I
hard.
didn't really think of that.
It's
Yeah, I
really
didn't think of my
hard,
second most favorite. Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome, awesome.
But yeah, like I said, with all the other guests, you're more than welcome to come back on the show whenever we do like a random topic, like about this topic or that topic. And probably in the near future, we'll probably just after Stranger Things is completely done, we'll probably just do a whole like couple episodes dedicated to
Awesome.
that. So yeah. Or
That'd
just
be
have
great.
a random movie. I mean, I know one of the our co-host, he finally watched Hannibal Lecter. I mean, Silence of the Lambs for the first
Yeah,
time. I mean, we could really talk a whole hour about
yeah,
that.
that good, and it's such a good book too. Like
Yeah.
the book and the movie really both hold up.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
All right. Well, everybody who's watching and live now or going to watch afterwards, his Kickstarter, go support it. Looks like a really awesome manga book, superhero stuff. PG-13, so you got some action going on. You got some
yeah, yeah.
cussing there, but it's blurred out. But hope you all
Absolutely.
have a great night.
Check it
Eh,
out. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem.